Hello, thank you for coming to the U.S. Center. We're about to get started with our next session. It's a NASA Hyperwall talk, From Sea to Space, NASA and Agriculture, by our scientist, Laura Rogers.
All right. Hey. Good afternoon and welcome back after lunch. So I don't know if anybody was here this morning, but we've had a really great discussion on agriculture. So I wanted to keep that going. We actually had USDA here as well as our NASA chief scientist talking about all the work we're doing in agriculture. So continuing on. Hopefully it works. So I wanted to take a step back just quickly and make sure everybody really understands what we do within NASA. And a lot of people think we do only looking out to space, right? But I want to make sure we also have 26 instruments looking back at our Earth. And these are really looking at multiple components of the Earth. But really starting at, this is a slightly different one, but really looking at, we have all of our observational and our operational missions that are going out to the outside. Those are the blue and green. And actually the blue are in extended operations. They've been up for a long time. In orange here, we have those that are in development. So they're looking to launch. We're actually launching 2 additional satellites beginning in the January timeframes. So we have a lot coming up. And then the green here, those are in formulation. So that's looking at our next decadal. And before I get too far, what I do want to do is I want to make sure that a lot of this work here, this is not necessarily my work. We have 2 very large consortia within NASA that is doing a lot of this work. And those consortium are working with multiple partners, up to 50 different organizations. So this is not a single entity within NASA. This is not a single entity. And it's certainly not me doing this work, but I'm going to try to do my best to explain what we're doing here. But these consortium, we have a domestic one that's really looking at issues within the United States, and that is called NASA Acres. And then we have an international consortium that is called NASA Harvest. All right, slide. So those are all the various instruments that we have looking back at the Earth. And this is studying the entire system that we have. So Earth is all interconnected, all interdependent. So all of our satellites, we're looking at things from the aerosols and clouds in the atmosphere. We're looking at our oceans. We're looking at vegetation, precipitation, and our ice sheets. So this just represents some of the various global observations that we have. And this really leads into some of our understanding when it comes to agriculture. Also want to make a quick note that all of the data that we collect, this is a large initiative, is all free and open to the public. So when we talk about how we understand our Earth, we both collect the data and make it open, but then we try to go that extra mile to make it accessible and usable so they can get into the hands of the decision makers and to change, to make for action. So that's what we're going to go into a lot here today. So to go back to agriculture, right? We want to think about multiple perspectives of agriculture. And one of the things that we really do well is look from multiple perspectives and across multiple time scales. We collect real-time data collection. And we provide these climate projections through climate models. One of the things we look at for agriculture is we have precipitation. We look at vegetation, soil moisture, and crop models. And I'll talk about each of these kind of in more detail. All right, so let's break this down a little bit. So we know that agriculture is intricately linked with water. The right amount of water and rainfall is essential for healthy crop growth, but too much or too little rainfall can have adverse effects on crop production. Too much rainfall can lead to soil erosion or flooding, and on the other hand, too little can really kill your mature plants in those later growing seasons. So this is from our global precipitation measurement, the GPM products. It's called iMerge, and this is the most comprehensive global rain and snowfall product to date. The iMerge dataset provides precipitation rates for the entire world every 30 minutes, so you can really get this near real-time data. Here, again, we know that precipitation is important, but we can also measure greenness and the health of the plants. So this is with a product called NDVI. So quickly what we're looking at here, and it's getting ahead of me, But we're looking at an area in Nebraska. The red indicates the bare soil, and the green indicates healthy vegetation. In the upper left here, what you can see are some crop fields. But what we can really tell is how quickly we can manage these. So over time is the seasonal, we have the greening, and in the winter you're going to see, where they're really managing these fields. And then of course the winter, the crops die. But you can see these distinct things. And vegetation health is often monitored is essentially the measure of this greenness. So this is what we can see again from space. Let's see. I already talked about that. Again, this is where I get this is not my agriculture top field, but it really helps farmers identify the health of their crops. Sometimes you can see where different crops are being stressed and they're experiencing nutrient deficiencies, but it also can be used to optimize that irrigation and the fertilization practices. So again, you can see where these crop fields are. Right, here is another variation of looking at NDVI. So on this panel here, we have what we were just looking at. It's just the measure of greenness. But we can also look at it in different ways in a NDVI anomaly. So what we can see in the red is where it is not as healthy as you would think or you would anticipate. And it's interesting, in 2023, in the August timeframe, when that comes back around, you really see the unhealthy crops in the southern U.S. and down into Mexico. And over time, you can start gathering these anomalies and looking at trends, and you can see the shifts in what our NDVI is doing over time, which can be an impact of our changing environment and our changing climate. Oops, one thing I didn't talk about. Again, I changed these up a little bit, so let me go back and hit something that's really important here. This animation is an HLS product. So HLS is our Harmonized Landsat and Sentinel product. So these two satellites, so one is US based and one is European based, they have the same spectral and spatial similarities, and they can together we can make this data more high resolution. So when the data are used together, the observations are more timely and accurate, and we can now provide this coverage every 2 to 3 days at a 30-meter resolution. So again, we're not just using one satellite, we're using two, and that assimilation is really bringing it together. So this is some of the power of the modeling. It's not just the observations, but how we provide that information out to those who are using it. So sorry for skipping that the first time around. And we talked about that. But now we're also looking at beyond just the precipitation. Now we're getting into the soil moisture and what we can see. Again, we talked about those various perspectives that NASA can provide. So we're not just seeing what's on the surface. Now we're actually looking down at the root zone and groundwater observation. And this is in Australia, but we do have this as a global product. So this is coming from what we call our GRACE follow-on mission. So this is a gravity measurement. And this modeling, we can produce these time-varying maps and the distribution of water at 3 depths. So again, at the surface, the root zone, which is, the top 3 feet of soil, and then again, our shallow groundwater. And we can see this over time. And here we're just showing, again, that though we don't have these in just one location, this is a global product. So this can be used whether you're on the northern or southern hemispheres. And we can also begin to identify how our changing climates and our changing soil moisture and precipitation are causing issues within our agriculture economy. So this is really just showing that not only are we collecting data, but we're continuing to improve. So in 2018, this is just an example of all of the data that we're collecting. Now, we also have another one of these for back in 2000, and you can really see the increase. Unfortunately, our screen was not big enough, so we couldn't show it all here. So you'll see this part, but it is enormous amounts of data. And as we bring this data into our global modeling and assimilation office, our modeling office is improving our models. So that leads me into what we're doing with crop models. And I'm going to stop this because they told me to practice this slide to make sure I hit it the right timing. And you wouldn't guess, but I cannot get the timing right. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk about it, and then I'll show you. I'll let it run through. So what we're looking at here, let me get it right, is when we talk about crop models, we really want to bring in the three factors, right? So crop models talk about your genetics and your biophysical properties. So we're talking about photosynthesis. When you talk about crop models, you want to talk about your environment. So that's both your current conditions and modeling. You want to look into the future so we can bring in our climate projections. And the other aspect of this is our farming management technique. So this is your irrigation, your fertilization. So we can bring all of this together. So what we're looking at in this particular graphic is yellow is corn, green is soy. And it's just going to go through time. But what's striking here is that the dark are your low production years, and the bright means a higher yield. So as we run through this, we're running crop models at a 30-meter resolution. And we're using supercomputers, so that you can run this down to the field and the sub-field level to look at responses over time. So now I'm going to play it, see if I can get it right. So again, each black line is tough to see right now, but as we get closer, that's about a 1 square mile. But again, the brighter colors are the higher yield years. And let me slow it down to see if I can get it right. The dark time frame is your low yield years, and that's going to be in 2012, and I couldn't get the timing right. But you can also see the evidence of gullies. So here's your 2012. There you go. So this is our low yield year, and it's really striking. But as you get closer, you can see the gullies. So your low areas are also going to be your low production areas. So it really brings it down to that low level so farmers can really understand what's happening in their fields, and they see the value of some of this work. But as we bring in more data, we get down to a lower level of resolution, and it's more and more valuable. And so partnerships with companies like John Deere or other commercial entities, or whether they're NGOs, there's more data that we can pull. And again, it brings it back down to that sub-field level. So this also is a slide here we're not just observing our agriculture system, but we're also forecasting what we can see. And what we really want to point out is that with all the data that we have and the models that we have, we're doing a pretty good job. So this is, moving into the future, but our correlations are pretty high, and we give ourselves a thumbs up. So we're working again with all of our partners, so it's not just us, but we're really confident in the way that we're going through some of our modeling here and our forecasting. But this is where it can get kind of scary. This is really the takeaway. So what we're looking at, this is a model projections of a high yield emission scenario. So this is using our AgMIP crop modeling. And so again, we have corn yield projections here and wheat yield projections up there. And as we move into the future with a high emission scenario, it's really striking on how corn is responding. And this is really predicted, right? This makes sense to us. So corn is really struggling because it's typically at the hotter latitudes, and it's really pushing its limits of temperature. Whereas wheat is at the higher latitudes and has more flexibility. Wheat also responds well to CO2, whereas corn does not. But the takeaway again is that this doesn't have to be the future. This is really the motivation for adaptation and mitigation, right? So again, if we stick to what we are doing now, we are going to have food security issues. Whereas if we adapt and we mitigate, we think about our crop modelings. I mentioned what are some of those things we can change. We can think about genetics of our crops. We can think about our different management techniques. But understanding where we are today and understanding what the potential future looks like really helps us make some of those decisions and inform how we move forward. All right, and this really is going to start wrapping it up here. This is some of our decision-making process and how we take those observations, again, from our instruments and our satellites in space, take that input down, really integrate it. So I talked about all of our modeling, our GMAO, but the crop models, getting into the forecasting and getting it into the hands. This is really the important part, and this is why we work with so many partners. Getting into the hands of those who are making the decisions, whether it's the farmers in the fields, whether it's the producers of the fertilizers, but making this information available so they can inform those next steps, so we don't get into an issue of food security with a changing climate. And with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up, but I'm happy to take questions for anybody who has some.
Hello. I was very excited to see it because I'm a native of Des Moines, Iowa.
Wonderful.
But my question is, this is going maybe too niche, you might not be able to answer this, but I'm wondering if you're partnering with ethanol producers, because in like Iowa, ethanol is such a big thing, but if you're seeing the outputs and problems with corn productions, but the ethanol kind of landscape that they're doing is very pushing as a more climate-friendly solution, how are you using this data to inform that kind of production or outlook that they're currently using to, you know, increase ethanol and things, which has issues with climate stuff? Thank you.
Yeah, and that is a fantastic question. And I can't speak to any specific partners specific to ethanol, but I can say we are working very closely with the Iowa Corn Growers Association. So they are highly tied to what we're working with. And a lot of what we do is through those boundary organizations. So we're working with them who then continue to work out and branch out with some of those more specific users. But that is a fantastic question, and I'll take that back to some of our consortium.
Hi, how are you doing? Thank you so much for your presentation. I love your models. I use the CO2 and methane prediction models all the time. Curious if you've had any discussions or any outreach with any kind of private sector. How is this data being used to affect and really guide investment in portfolio strategies for technology, whether it's methane mitigation or whether it's sustainable and regenerative agriculture practices? Can you tell us a little bit about those discussions and how those are informing some of those financial decisions?
Yeah, and again, the specifics of it, I don't get into, but we do work very closely with the private sector. So we recognize that where a lot of the action is going to take place is also going to hit, you know, the consumer's pocket, right? And how that business model plays back is incredibly important. So I mentioned John Deere. We work pretty closely with them, mostly because they have a lot of data, but also working with those, I also mentioned the various fertilizer producers, or we work with the irrigation companies a lot, and how they can better produce different sprinkler systems. That's not the technical term. But we do work pretty closely with multiple types of private sector across all many different sectors. So I don't have specifics for you, but that is another great question. Got two more.
Thanks for the presentation. Just wanted to know, I see you have a global database, right? And you know the technology that you use is global in essence. Do you work with other countries and jurisdictions and make the models available?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest things we want to do is not only do we make the data available, but the models are available. And one of our largest users is through the Group on Earth observations. So we produce crop monitoring reports as well as the actual models. Everything is open source. All the code is open source, and all of the outputs are open source. So there are things such as the global newsletters, which are more static, but where that comes from, all the code and science behind that is open and available. And again, that is global.
Thank you for this great presentation. I just wondering, because it's amazing that farmers can use data from NASA. I was wondering, is there any treatment of data? Because before, it comes to farmers, or is it really, really user-friendly? And I don't know concretely how they receive the data, how they can use it to help them make decisions about their crops, etc. I'm from Morocco, so I would just try to imagine this with farmers with less literacy level. Is it something easy to access to any farmer all over the world? Just a question like that.
Yeah, and there's multiple answers to that. So I'll give you one example. And I actually just had them delete the slide 5 minutes before this presentation, so I should have left it in. But we have one tool called OpenET. So this is really looking at evapotranspiration. And this is all, again, it's available on an app on your phone or through various websites or API. But you can go into that and determine how to best irrigate your farms. So we have an example of Dwayne, who is in Nebraska, and he is using this app to understand the irrigation setups, and he is saving 900 million gallons of water in a season. Now, you don't quote me on those numbers, but he has gone through and used how can he understand his farming and his acreage and look at what needs to be irrigated and when. So this is an example of specific use focused on irrigation through a tool called OpenET. And it brings together numerous data sets. It's not just, an iMerge product. It is multiple data sets integrated together and made specifically for open use.
Thank you. Well, if no more questions, let's give a round of applause again to Laura.
Thank you all.